Today we're working on getting a pay rise. Welcome to Working On It, the podcast that helps you navigate the complexities of today's working environment. With me, Lauren Spearman, brand consultant and advocate for care, transparency and flexibility at work.
And I'm Molly Johnson-Jones, CEO and co-founder of Flexa. Lauren and I are here to provide you with practical advice, hopefully insightful discussions, and expert guidance on how to thrive in your career.
In this episode, we're tackling a topic that is on a lot of people's minds, getting a pay rise. We're going to explore how to ask for a pay rise, how to prepare your case, and what to do if your request is denied.
We'll also discuss the current landscape of pay rises, share some negotiation strategies, and offer insights on how to increase value to your employer.
Quick thanks to our episode sponsor, Ultra Speaking, but more on them later.
Right, I feel like this is going to be a really interesting one because obviously we've got two quite different perspectives. I think we'll agree on some things.
Yes, but I guess we're probably going to be coming at it from slightly different experiences and views.
Yeah, definitely.
I think we should probably start thinking about like the current state of play when it comes to pay rises. If you've got any kind of key stats that we should be aware of.
2023, obviously, because interest rates increased, there was a decent enough pay growth. So pay growth in the UK, according to the ONS, was about 6.5% just in the year of 2023. But despite that, about 65% of people that are employed said that they were planning to ask for a pay rise. And the same survey found that about a third of workers said that they would consider changing roles if they didn't receive that pay rise.
I wonder how much of that stat around people looking to ask for a raise is linked to cost of living versus their actual role, because
I think that's what's really tricky is the decoupling of personal circumstances and what your role is worth. And I think that's there's quite a lot of tension between those two things, because obviously as the cost of living increases, it is harder for people to live in the same way that they were before. But also the cost of living affects employers as well, and how much money they can make and how profitable and successful they can be. It's cost more to run the business as well. So it's sort of like there shouldn't be no pay growth, because with inflation, naturally, there should be some pay growth, of course. But I think there's a little bit of a warped perception that the cost of living crisis only affects individuals,
rather than the knock-on effect of what that means for a wider business.
And the whole economy, right? And if we end up in a position where pay rises just happen and keep happening and keep happening, we end up in a point of hyperinflation, right?
As soon as we start talking about that, anything like that goes over my head. Okay.
Your face was like, you were like, literally pure panic.
I was like, fuck, I'm zoned out. Shit. What are some common reasons that employers might give a pay rise?
Yeah, there are loads. I mean, if we kind of put them into performance related and then like other reasons. So the first obvious one that you'd give somebody a pay rise is if they're a really strong performer and they're contributing more to the business. So you want to recognise that, make sure they're happy, keep them, reward them. So you give them a pay rise. Another one would be you've promoted somebody, or they've taken on additional responsibility, like they're suddenly managing somebody, or they've taken on a bit of scope that was outside their role originally, and it's worth more money if they were to go out onto the open market. And then there's the sort of external ones like market rate adjustments. So I mean, and I'm coming at this from probably a perspective that not every employer would do, but we benchmark salaries. So like we take what we are paying individuals in the company, and then we put that into like a sort of salary tracker that has the averages in the market and then like what the best people are paid. And we double check on a 6-monthly basis with everybody, are they in market rate or above?
Do you think many employers do that?
I think it's becoming, thankfully, increasingly common in like startups and scale ups where their people are so important and like high levels of attrition.
Trying to attract good talent.
Yeah. High levels of attrition are really problematic, and you want to attract the best people into a startup, which naturally has its own downsides of risk and high workload, whatever it is. So I think more startups are doing it. It becomes quite tricky to just like randomly move people's salaries if you're in a massive organization, right? We've got much, much more freedom to be able to do it. But it has made a huge difference to be able to say every 6 months, you know, if suddenly we see that somebody is below average, you know, we'll adjust them and we'll tell them, we're moving your salary up to this, and they don't have to come to us and ask for that. But that approach,
this is the stuff I dream of.
Yeah. But that approach I don't think is super, super common. Ones that have been more common of just like the random increases are obviously as inflation's gone up and cost of living increases, like small increases or stipends of like a particular, like here's £2,000 towards whatever it is, or we'll move your salary up a few percent.
It's interesting. You touched on, I guess, bigger corporations or in general receiving pay rises when you have a promotion or your responsibility changes. I have my own story on this. So
yeah. It's going to be a horror story, isn't it?
Of course. I was offered my second promotion in 6 months. So I'd been at the business a while, got a promotion, and then 6 months later got another promotion where I was taking on a whole entire other team. It was at the same time that we were doing annual reviews. So I would have naturally had, again, it would have just been in line with inflation, whatever, because that was basically how they did it. It wasn't really performance based. But at the same time, I got a promotion. And when I asked what they were offering me salary wise, I was told it was in line with annual review. And I was like, but I'm taking on another team.
Yeah.
And I was told it's not a promotion, it's just extra responsibility.
But you were managing more people and that doesn't make sense.
My role was changing. I was like, this isn't okay. I also, at the same time, knew I was being underpaid versus my male colleagues. That's a whole other issue. But I was then called into HR to discuss what it means to be a leader in the business. Because, basically sit down and shut up. I did manage to negotiate a little bit more extra money, but it left such a sour taste in my mouth
have had to push
that I was expected to take on an entire new team without even discussing what that might look like salary-wise.
That's really interesting. I think a lot of companies, sadly, do tend to offer promotions without pay rises, which I think is really tricky. I think there's a difference.
Promotions via it's not a promotion, it's just a job title change. That fucks me off.
But I think there's a big difference, and I think sometimes it can be conflated as well as like what happened to you, where it was like you were taking on additional responsibility, managing more people. That obviously was a promotion. I think sometimes there's some confusion, like if there is a role change, which they were trying to pretend it was, but actually wasn't. But if there is a role change and you're just moving someone to something different, then you can't always expect a pay rise. And I think sometimes those two things can get a little bit confused.
Yes, that makes total sense. I also, when you touched on you review salaries annually, you review salaries every 6 months.
From a benchmarking perspective, yes. And then there's like a performance review annually as well.
Fine. So I don't think I've ever worked anywhere that really looks at salaries outside of an annual review.
Yeah.
And often there is a bucket of money that is going to be put towards extra pay increases. And so once that's split up between everyone, there's not really any flex to negotiate on that. I guess my issue with annual reviews are sometimes I think people are waiting a long time for their salary to catch up with what they're doing.
Yeah, I think the rigidity of it just being annual can be quite problematic sometimes.
I experienced once. So this team that I mentioned earlier that I took on, as part of the transition when I was taking on the team, I sat in someone's mid-year review where they were told by their current boss they were working at the level above, but they're just not going to give them the role or look at their salary, even though they were already... I mean, the fact that they outwardly gave that information away, I think it was ridiculous. But then what happened was I was like, I've just now inherited someone who's been told they're working at the level above, who've been told they weren't allowed to even negotiate on salary, but wait 6 months. You know, when it comes to the next review. 6 months came round. The day before her review, she came to me and handed in her notice, and I was like,
strange timing.
Yeah, I mean, good on her. I was like, good on you, girl. You've been told you've been working for over 6 months, knowing that you're being held back by your last boss, not because of your own ability.
Yeah.
And and I was fighting that entire 6 months for her to be paid more. And my biggest frustration was when she left, we recruited her role at the salary that she had been asking for.
And that's the kind of thing that can often happen, and it is frustrating for people to see. And I think there's sort of two sides to those situations that happen. Like, obviously that's a bad thing. They should have given her the chance to be heard, not been told, or you're operating at the level above. And like, there's just a frustrating situation and the kind of order of events. Naturally, if somebody goes, oh, I've got this offer of X and I'm probably going to leave, you might want to try to match it. But I do think companies should be a little bit more proactive, so that trying to get a pay rise doesn't feel like trying to get blood from a stone.
Yes.
And it's more like it's a two-way conversation. But I think it's tricky because when you're handling loads of those conversations, right? Like I'm sure the pay rise conversations in big companies, they're probably happening daily to some extent.
Yeah.
And so there has to be some level of order to be able to fall back on. And I think those stories often come out and are super frustrating because it's like someone that fell between, it should be that somebody's fallen between the cracks, not that that's habitual.
Yes. But it is so frustrating as someone who's managing a team to know that you're
to have
going
nothing
to lose good
to
talent.
go back with. Yeah.
Let's think about what someone should do when they're preparing for a pay rise.
Yep.
I guess my first port of call would always be as an employee to try and research what a market rate for my role or, you know, what that would be, and try and gauge with your experience level where you should be within a range. You know, if I know that the first time I became head of department within a range, I was probably going to be at the bottom end of that range because I was stepping up into the role versus if they'd have hired someone with
more
who was experienced into that. And then I guess also building up a bank of evidence to show what you've achieved within the last whatever that time frame
and
is.
why you're worth more as well. Like I think that's a really important part of it is if you just turn up one day and you go, I want more money, that's not a particularly useful conversation. I think if you're in the situation where your employer has not already recognised the fact that you're performing well and in a little nudge rather than a shove of like, oh, ask you about progression, and then, you know, you'd hoped that they'd come to you with, you know, actually, we think you'd be on for a promotion in the next 3 or 6 months, and that would come with a pay rise. If you're not in that situation where it's sort of being offered to you or there's a plan, then absolutely your advice of like research what market rate is, come with evidence of like what you've done, what more you've taken on, or how much better you've gotten at your job since you started on that pay grade.
Yeah, because I think it's not just saying I'm doing the job, it's about I've gone above and beyond or I've exceeded what I'm doing, which would then make me more valuable.
And that, I think, is a common misconception from individuals is just because they're doing the job, they should be paid more. Which does my head in. Because if you're just doing the job that you were doing previously, you were hired on that pay or you were given that pay. So unless you are stepping up, why would you be paid more if you're just doing the job? It should be that you've gone above and beyond, or you've changed your output, or you're contributing more to the business. Otherwise, it's still a grand a year.
And because you're contributing more, your value is more.
Exactly.
I guess one thing I would say, though, on asking for a pay rise is consider where the business is.
Yeah.
You know, if they've just done a big round of redundancies, for example,
not good time.
Probably not a good time.
If they've just raised funding, good time. If you've just sold a big deal, good time.
As that contract is signed.
Yeah, or like, you know, you've just realised that somebody else has just been promoted and you feel like there are times to have those conversations and there are times to very, very much avoid it. And I think also one of the things, and I think you'll agree with me on this one, that I find really funny when people walk into those pay rise conversations is even if you think it deep down, don't say, oh, I just bought a really expensive house and I'm struggling. Or like, I'm really trying to save up for a nice holiday and I just don't have enough money. I think there's a big conflation, and we talked about this in the previous episode, between your lifestyle and what you're being paid. And if you are living beyond your means, people have a tendency to blame their employer, even when they're being paid fairly for the job.
Yeah.
And I think that creates a very difficult conversation because it makes the individual look a bit silly. And also then from the individual's perspective, builds quite a lot of resentment towards the employer.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I once had a member of my team that I managed come to me with, I've just moved house, the mortgage has gone up, which...
You feel for them as a human.
Yes, of course. And I know that struggle.
Yeah.
But that isn't something that the business has to take on.
No, and it's not like if you said, I have taken on more responsibility and I believe that I should be paid more, and coincidentally my mortgage has gone up, that's fine.
Yeah. But yeah, you can't lead with that. That's not the business's responsibility. We kind of touched on like working out your market value.
Yeah.
I think we talked about it, you mentioned from an employer point of view. I guess as an employee, one of my biggest tips on working out market value is speaking to people.
Yeah.
I'm so skeptical about looking at job listings because I don't necessarily think they're them. I also don't think they necessarily reflect what someone's worth sometimes. So I will, I might use things like Glassdoor or whatever to get a bit of a steer?
We've actually just built something that lets people benchmark themselves, work out whether they're in the top 20%, 30%. Yeah.
Oh, gonna get on it
Okay.
when I work out what it is I do. But I think one of the biggest things has come from speaking to people that do those jobs to get a bit of a steer on what they are. And also, one thing when I was job searching last year is I had a couple of calls with recruiters as well.
That's a good idea.
To find out, am I mad for wanting X amount of salary, or where would you put me within that position? Because if there is, often with bigger roles, there's bigger ranges. So where do you think I sit based on my experience, based on other candidates that you're speaking to? I found that really helpful.
Yeah, I think that definitely is. And I think also, like, say if you are happy in your role, but you're like, I would just like to be paid a bit more. If you get approached by a recruiter, sometimes it's worth going through that process just to see, like, oh, actually, could I get an offer? And then I don't want to leave, but I can say, I've got this offer on the table. And I do think that can be quite a useful bargaining tool.
Do you not think that's a bit of a risk? Because what if you're not doing that great in the business and someone's like, okay, yeah, great.
Not saying, not going, don't burn that bridge. Just not saying like, I'm going to leave. Say, I really do want to stay, but I've just been offered this. It would be great if you could match it. I understand that this business also brings X, Y, Z. But, for me, it's hard for me to think about turning that down.
But do you not think then the employer is looking at you going, they're not that loyal, or not that? Sorry, I'm actually not a big fan of saying loyal to somewhere, by the way. But
I do think that. No, I've certainly never questioned loyalty. I think maybe there's a little bit of a disillusionment of some companies being like, you should be loyal to this and never look anywhere else.
A dent on the ego that someone might not want to work for them.
Yeah, which is crazy. Like if someone is offering them more, or like, we've had people actually recently get offered a really exciting opportunity with more money and the ability to manage a team. That was the right move for her. We didn't try to persuade her to stay because we couldn't match that. We could have probably matched the salary thing, but in terms of the opportunity, it was an objectively better opportunity.
Yeah, didn't
question her loyalty, absolutely not. And we've had other people come to us and say pretty much what I said there about like, I've got this offer, I want to stay, and I totally understand. Like if you're offered more money. Yes, we offer a huge amount of flexibility, a 4.5-day week, 45 days holiday, loads of other shit. But when it comes down to it, money does matter. And it was only like a sort of $5,000 pay rise. Like it wasn't drastic and we wanted to keep them.
Yeah, makes sense.
We shouldn't be questioning loyalty just because people go and explore other options, or they handle it quite cleverly, to be honest.
No, I years ago, like quite early in my career, someone said to me, you should always be interviewing. And that's not necessarily...
It's exhausting.
No, but I don't think that's necessarily going to interviews. I think it's just the element of networking and seeing what's out there. Not necessarily formal interviews, but that element of always knowing what is available on the market.
I think it's also okay to be happy and take a little bit of like a pause and be like, this is a job I'm enjoying, it's paying me well, and I'm very happy at the moment. I think when you're in that position of like, I'm getting a bit restless or whatever, then yeah, I would adopt that behavior. But I think if you're always feeling this pressure to constantly be looking and chasing, like that doesn't give you any time to just sort of be like, oh, I got to where I'm happy I got here in my career and I just want to enjoy it.
Yes, you're always chasing that. What about when it comes to like actually having that conversation with your manager?
Yeah.
I guess I initially would say make sure it's a specific conversation about pay rise rather than you get to your weekly one-on-one or whatever and then it's like, oh shit, and by the way, can we chat pay rise? I think coming at it from both having managed people and asked people, I would make sure there's dedicated time to make it clear this is what we're discussing.
Yes. Or bringing it up and saying next time we catch up, it would be great to talk about progression or promotion or whatever it might be, and sort of signposting that as well. I think you can sort of move the conversation on for the next weekly catch up or whatever it might be as well.
I also think it gives you the chance for your boss to come prepared as well. So, I've done that before where someone's asked me to chat about pay rises and then I've gone to HR and I was like, right, can you share me what are the ranges for this role? Like what should I be aware of so that I'm going in not completely blind to what is possible.
Yeah.
I think one of the worst things you could do is just go, I want a pay rise. I think you should be really specific in what is it you're asking for.
Yeah. And why? and signpost like, I feel like I'm contributing more, I've exceeded my targets, or I'm managing more people, or I've taken on more responsibility, and demonstrating that. And I think doing that positively as well makes a really big difference. I think the way that somebody can approaches a conversation in terms of like just general vibe does make a difference to the outcome that you'll generate. And I think if you go into that conversation complaining and that's all you do, it creates a very negative atmosphere, and you're like, I don't want to reward this behaviour. Not saying that you can't complain. Of course you can.
Oh god, you went into like full teacher mode then.
Not rewarding that behaviour. But not
girl.
to say that you can't complain, but it needs to be like more of a structured.
It needs to be a positive conversation to get a positive result, right?
Exactly. You can't just go in and be like, everything's shit, I'm underpaid, I hate my job, pay me more. No.
I mean, I'm freelance now, but it's different. But I often think I'd love to see other forms of negotiation. Like if I can't get a pay rise, could I do like a 9-day fortnight, for example? Or what does that look like?
Yeah, we've had those conversations when we've been hiring as well, like where we haven't been able to meet someone's expectations, that we've said, okay, well, we can make it work with a 4-day week then.
Do you think? I think that's quite rare that people offer that. I think that's because a lot of employers like, if we do it for one, we have to do it for everyone.
Which is bollocks. Like, like I love this, like you can't have exceptions to the rule, but what's the rule?
Yeah, you set the rules as a business.
You set the rules. And obviously there are things like you need to turn up to work on time, you need to do your job. They're the rules.
Yeah.
But if someone is taking 80% of their market value, the rule surely is that they can work 4 days a week because the market sets the rules.
Yeah. Also, this notion that a job can only be done on 5 days. Like, where has that ever been tested before?
And I think but then obviously there needs to be, it's like it's a two-way street in that sense of, if then the negotiation is like, okay, you could do this role 4 days a week because actually you could be paid 20% more in the open market. There also needs to be a little bit of flexibility of like, how do we make that work? And is it that 4 days is absolutely fine, but there is an expectation to check your emails if you're in a client-facing role, not be online and working, but just like if an emergency happens that you can forward something on, you know, those kind of conversations, because obviously the employer's giving a lot in that situation. It is a two-way street. So we talk about approaching the conversation. Obviously, as a manager in your previous careers, like obviously you've had people come to you. Have you got examples of when it's been handled terribly and when it's been handled well?
Touching on your earlier point, when people come at it from a personal, this is happening in my personal life, I need money for this, therefore I want a pay rise, that's when it's not gone well. Because I'm like, how can I'm
not your mum and it's not pocket money.
Like, don't get me wrong, I don't want to put, I don't like seeing people in financial trouble or difficulty, but that's not a business. That doesn't help build a business case for why someone should get a pay rise. I think the best example is just thinking about this woman that I worked with. She was just fucking awesome. But it was a slow, steady build up to, in 6 months' time, I think I'm going to be, this is where I want to get to. So she pushed me a little bit on, if I want this pay rise, what do I need to do to get it? So
very structured.
I felt like we kind of worked together, and I, really championed her, and, we were able to, and I was then able to speak to my, boss and say, look, when it comes to these reviews, I really think, I can see someone that's really.
So you had loads of time to prepare for it and then give her what she wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's a smart way of doing it. We've had a couple of people approach it like that at Flexer, and it does make a really big difference, because often when somebody asks for a pay rise, if it hasn't been as a result of a performance review and they've sort of just said, I'd like to be paid more, there are often things that they need to improve and need to build on, and being given time by saying, in 6 months, I'd love to be here. What do I need to do to get there? Gives you a chance to have that back and forth feedback and actually improve that situation together. I
think so. And it's not a case of just like dangling the carrot and seeing like, oh, that may happen. I think it's let's try and work together on it. And that is it's so motivating as a manager to then see your team motivated and then rewarded in that way.
And it gives you a chance to give concrete, useful, actionable feedback as well. Rather than like, oh, I just don't think you're there yet, which is nothing more frustrating. And sometimes it is true. Somebody just, for reasons you can't put your finger on, is not quite there. But if you really sit down and think about it, there probably are specific things that they can change.
Yeah. And it's also not useful for your boss to tell you you're not quite there without anything.
Yeah, exactly.
You need a bit more than that.
But I think if they feel ambushed and it's like, I just want to be paid more, and you're like, oh, you're not quite there yet, that's also not a conducive conversation on either side.
Of course. it also allows for the business to plan for that increase as well, right?
Because it's not always as simple as just like, you can have more money, you can have more money. Like, you need to budget.
Oprah's coming out.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone can have a pay rise. You do need to plan it. There are budget cycles. Like, when you're running a business, there's a lot of consideration in terms of like, how do we get to profitability if you're not there? Or how do we get to X target? And if there's just 50% of the company is just all granted a pay rise, it's going to fuck the budget, right? And so if you've got the ability to, like that lady did approach it with, gives kind of 6 months, you can plan it in, you can look at it, and you can be much more confident in making those decisions. Whereas if it's just an ambush and then you go, oh, they don't appreciate me because they haven't bent to my pay rise request, I think that's taking it as a very one-sided view. Like, it's not just about you. Obviously it matters and you should feel rewarded and paid fairly. But if you are paid fairly and all you want is a pay rise, it's very, very one-sided.
Yeah, of course.
And I think also just from the sort of perspective of the employer, I think often people think that, if they're asking for a $5,000 pay rise or a $10,000 pay rise, that's all it is. Like, what you
that's
see,
the cost of the business.
The cost of the business. Whereas you've got national insurance, you've got obviously the pension that you're then contributing on top of that. Like, there's loads of hidden costs that the employee never sees to giving that pay rise. And that's not an excuse to be like, oh, people shouldn't give pay rise at all, but it's another reason for needing to forecast that and how actually your $10,000 request can be a lot more than that.
Yeah. No, that's a really fair point. This is a quick reminder you're listening to Working on It, the podcast that unpacks the trials and tribulations of today's work environment, with me, Lauren Spearman.
And me, Molly Johnson-Jones. It's time for a quick ad break.
Ever freeze up before a big presentation? For many of us, public speaking can be absolutely nerve-wracking. But it doesn't have to be. After coaching thousands of clients and students, our friends at Ultra Speaking have put together the Ultimate Public Speaking Playbook, a free mini course breaking down some of their most powerful techniques to help you to become a more engaging speaker in just 5 days. So, are you ready to overcome your public anxiety and change your career trajectory? Head to ultraspeaking.com/Flexer to get instant access to the mini course, or click the link in the show notes.
Coming up, we're going to discuss strategies to ensure that you get that pay rise. But as always, let's hear a real life pay rise story from a listener.
Okay, let's have a little look at what we've got here. James in Leeds writes, I've been with my company for 3 years and I've consistently exceeded my targets. I felt it was time for a pay rise, so I prepared a presentation of my achievements and I practiced my pitch. When I approached my manager, she seemed receptive, but said the company was under a pay freeze due to economic uncertainty. She suggested we revisit the conversation in 6 months. I'm frustrated because I feel undervalued, but I also understand the company's position. What should I do now? Should I start looking for a new job or wait it out?
Oh, that's so difficult.
So James is saying that his boss was receptive, but the company was under a pay freeze due to economic uncertainty.
Which does happen.
I feel like that is tough to then go, well, I'm going to keep pushing for it, right?
Yeah. It's one of those situations where if it's been 3 years and there's been consistent target exceeding, his pay should have been adjusted if he's contributing so much to the business. And 3 years is a long time.
Yeah.
So it feels like there's a little bit of onus to be placed on the company's behaviour there. But then it's also very difficult because if he's happy there, and I'd assume he was being bonused for exceeding those targets. If he wasn't, then obviously that's a shit show. But assuming he was, and then can he get clarity now in 6 months' time? Am I going to get a pay rise? That's how I would handle that situation. Be like, fine, I'm not going to get a pay rise now. Do you think that currently I deserve more, or do I need to do more over the next 6 months in order to get there? And I'd kind of frame it as that sort of like development conversation.
I wonder if also, should he be thinking about, like, what would that pay rise be?
Yeah, exactly.
If he's gone
so
3
asking
years,
for clarity, yeah.
If the boss can't guarantee that, which if you're going through economic uncertainty, I don't see how you could guarantee anything.
Well, it depends on whether, is that economic uncertainty like the world? As in like, is it the fact that we're in an economic downturn?
Or is it actually
the
we've got some funding coming in, or we're...
So yeah, the pay freeze thing is valid, and whether it's due to, has the economic downturn affected that business negatively? Is it that there's a there's a pay freeze, and like they are often used as excuses, but they're also often real. Because if you are at a point with a business where like maybe your costs have massively increased and your revenue has dropped, it could be that by not offering pay rises to the 20 people that are asking, you are saving 5 people from losing their job, because there's only a finite amount of money within a business. And if you're very frivolous with it and you're suddenly like, you can have a pay rise, you can have a pay rise, it'll become a point where in pretty much every business, the biggest cost is people. So you just have to cut that. And you think, well, if I ask for that pay rise now, yeah, somebody else might eventually down the road lose their job.
That happened to me in like during lockdown. So when COVID hit, the whole business was offered the chance to, that wasn't a pay freeze, it was a pay cut, but it was reflected in our hours.
Yeah.
So I went down to 80%.
Yeah.
And oh my God, I just worked till like 3 o'clock every day instead of, I did 5 days, but I did 3 every day. What a joy.
Yeah.
It was great. But I wonder if James could maybe look at, if he can't get a pay rise right now, what other form of compensation, or how could he feel rewarded in the next 6 months that isn't related to pay?
Or is it like in 6 months' time, yes, we can guarantee that we will give you another 10 grand as long as the business recovers. It's just like, but there will be conditions on that, right? And I think that people often feel like if there are conditions on something, that it's reflecting their value, and then they'll feel undervalued. Whereas again, it's just the reality of like, they're assuming the pay freeze is for 6 months so that they'll get back to proper business performance. But then if that doesn't happen, they can't give that pay rise. So for him, it's like,
it comes down to what you were saying earlier about like how happy is he?
Yeah.
Where he currently,
and is he happy with the
currently is.
uncertainty?
Yeah.
And I think that's what's tricky, is like, if they can commit to that, also, are you okay with knowing that maybe this business won't be performing in 6 months? It might be the right time to start looking if he's unhappy and he really does feel undervalued and can't get any clarity on what's going to happen. But also, is he okay to sort of wait it out if he's given a sort of finite timeline?
Yeah, of course.
So James, if you're listening, we totally understand your frustration. And it's a situation that I think many of us have found ourselves in before. It is really challenging because there's always two sides, and you won't always see the employer side, which I think can often be, it can feel like they are undervaluing you or trying to pull the wool over your eyes or make excuses for not doing something. But in reality, there nearly always is something on the other side of that. So hopefully that was some helpful advice on how to navigate it. And if you do choose to look elsewhere, then good luck.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, James. We love to hear those stories. Keep them coming in.
And also, I think it's important to remember that your value isn't just determined by your salary. It's obviously incredibly important that you're paid fairly. But in lots of companies, there are like, I remember I did a LinkedIn post about like work love languages and like how people feel happy and rewarded. And like some people
Where's the affirmation? Tell me I'm good.
Yeah, exactly. Some people just want praise.
Physical touch.
And the praise
so
matters. Please don't touch me at work. But some people really want praise, and that matters more to them than like a 5 grand pay rise. And if they go into a culture where praise is not normal and it's just like, just get on with it and you're given a bonus if you exceed targets, they won't be happy at all. Whereas there are some people that will need much more like sort of collaboration and like continual communication, and that matters the most to them, and that matters more than a slight pay bump. Other people are like, if I hit a target, I just need this money and I need that number and I don't care about anything else. There's like loads of different things. So I think it's important to work out what you really value in a company as well.
I'm totally digressing now. What are the other work love languages?
So this is absolutely not from a credible source. This is from my brain and I completely made it up. But I found it interesting myself. You know the normal love languages?
Yeah. Oh, know them well.
So words of affirmation is praise.
Yeah.
So when you're being managed, you need reassurance that you're doing a good job on a regular basis. You like being complimented and recognised. And when you're managing somebody, you find it really easy to give praise. It doesn't feel forced, and you like making people secure with your words. So then there's...
So cute.
You're like, I want that.
It's like welling up. I just want someone to tell me I'm good.
Quality time is about regular interaction. So when you're being managed, you enjoy like regular connection. You don't like going long periods of time without hearing from people as you feel distant and unconnected and it starts to fester. Then when you're managing somebody, if regular interaction is your love language, you find it easiest to maintain relationships with regular smaller interactions rather than waiting for big scheduled meetings. And long periods of time disconnected makes management feel harder for you. Physical touch, no. That becomes in-person connection. So when you're being managed, you find it easiest to build relationships and feel secure when you spend time with people in person. So you read a lot into body language and expression, and you really care about that in a working relationship.
I've got an old boss who, she's one of my closest friends. She fucking hates it when I hug her when I say hello.
I'm not a hugger either, especially not with people that I would have known through work. So managing when you like the in-person connection, you find it easiest to build and maintain relationships with the people like in an office, both for like work and non-work topics. And you don't feel like you're as an effective manager when you don't see them day to day. Your acts of service turns into coaching and availability.
Oh.
So when you're being managed, you want to feel like your manager's there for you, wants to spend time like developing your skills and helping you to progress. And you feel most secure when it feels natural to ask for that time, rather than feeling like you're being an inconvenience. And then on the flip side, if you're managing somebody, you love being that sort of mentor manager. Like you want to help with professional and personal development, and you want the people around you to see you as a valuable asset to that. And then the final one, receiving gifts, is reward and recognition. So like being managed, if you hit a target, you want that bonus, or you want something to be sent to you to say, well done. And public recognition makes you feel like you've been the most appreciated. And then from a managing perspective, you find it really natural to like showcase people's achievements. Like you might shout them out on Slack or in a town hall or whatever it is. And you seek to recognize them. You know, if they're having a bad day, you might send them something or whatever it is. And so I think the context of all of this is like, obviously salary is super important, but there are also some things that are going to really matter to you that might matter more than leaving a company that offered you some of these things for the sake of $3,000 in a year.
Yeah. And which, going back to James, the reader story, actually, he might be able to get more mentorship from someone in the business or more visibility on other projects that will help his development. There's more than just salary. That was very wise. I really enjoyed that. Thank you. Love a little love language chat.
I think they actually go quite nicely onto the work ones.
Really like those. What's yours? What's your work love language?
I am probably as being managed is the regular connection, definitely. And then in terms of managing, I would say probably the reward and recognition. Like I find it easy to sort of say like, oh, well done for something. And you know, I'll notice like if somebody's having a bad day, you'd be like, get yourself a takeaway, or you know, if it's somebody's birthday, want to do something nice. I think it's probably the reward and recognition side. Yeah. What about you?
I mean, if we're thinking about the Office romance episode, physical touch is probably there. But no, in all seriousness, words of affirmation.
Yeah.
Like, and reward and recognition for sure, both in how I give and receive.
That's interesting.
I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but sometimes pay rise requests get denied.
Yeah.
We should probably discuss that. The most obvious one for me is, I guess, trying to get a justification for why that is. So is it based on something that's business related, or is it something about personal? Your own performance? Yeah. And if it is performance related, getting feedback, clear feedback, and also actionable feedback. It's not just a subjective opinion. There needs to be a bit of rationale behind it.
And then like a timeline. So you ask then, I think, you know, in 6 months' time, can we have a check-in about this? I want to make sure that I'm on the right track, and then act on that feedback. I always think a really, really, really important thing, if your pay rise request is denied, and it's not a situation in which like you've really been screwed over, such as, you know, that X person next to you is being paid more doing the same job, or, you know, like real injustices, is if you want to stay at that company, or you want to buy yourself a bit of time to go and look for something else, take it well. Like if you throw exactly. If you throw your toys out the pram, like, fuck you, we didn't want to work for you anyway, leave, and then you're still there 2 weeks later. Better to just take a second, and even if you really feel like it's hugely unfair, just go, okay, it would be great to check in on this, because I personally don't agree with all of that, but I can appreciate that there are some other areas that I need to build on and improve. So if we could catch up in 3 months, make sure I'm on the right track, whatever it is.
I think psychologically as well, just having that timeline on it is helpful as well. So it's not just this ongoing, like, torture is a bit of a strong word, but feeling of like, okay, when's this coming, or when can we discuss this again? I think that's helpful.
And also I think, and I'd give this advice to any kind of negotiation conversation at work, before you go into it, take a little bit of a check on, are some of the things that you're raising definitely to do with work? Because I've seen quite a few times with like pay rise conversations or conversations about being unhappy or conversations about something not being right, being very, very influenced by people's personal lives and going through a tough time outside of work, and then they'll bring it into work.
Yes. One thing we haven't touched on actually, but you've just kind of sparked something, is I mentioned before about someone else being paid more than me. I think we should also be wary of, within a certain level, there's often a range. So you can't just go in and go, oh, so-and-so's paid more than me. Well, yeah, they may have a hell of a lot more experience that they're bringing. So I think that's not, you can't necessarily use that as your
You also
rationale.
Arguably shouldn't know. So it's dangerous to walk in with it.
I'm all for discussing.
But it's not good to just go, Dave's paid 70 and I'm on 63.
Yes,
What's going on?
Yeah.
It's also really, really common that there is discrepancy and often gender pay gaps with the same roles. So I think it's something that is important to be aware of. But as you say, like, don't always assume it's just because you are a woman or doing whatever role it is. Like, there can naturally be pay discrepancy. I think it's where, and there are plenty of situations where somebody with more experience and potentially more responsibility came in at an earlier point in their salary, like hasn't been adjusted. It's why a lot of the salary transparency stuff is still quite thorny, because a lot of companies aren't ready for it yet.
But it's also like I said it before, I think at the start of the episode, when I became a head of department, I wasn't expected to be paid the same as every other head of department because there were people there with much more experience in that area. Yeah. It's not always the easiest conversation to ask for a pay rise. People can potentially, be a little bit nervous or apprehensive about bringing that up. But I do think it's quite a normal part of your professional life to have those discussions. It shouldn't be seen as something.
Everyone is asking. And I think as long as you handle it well and you take a lot of the advice that we've both run through, that conversation isn't going to go terribly. Like, don't give ultimatums.
Yeah.
Don't say it's because you're living beyond your means. Don't get grumpy about it. And have a clear conversation about, like, give advance warning, which I think was your advice before, of like, can we talk about this next time, or whatever it might be. Come in with a structure of like, I think I deserve a pay rise because of X, Y, Z, and have benchmarked yourself so you know what you're asking for. If you go in with those three things and then you take feedback, if it's a no, you can't go wrong.
Yeah.
You can't go wrong.
I would also suggest, like, I've done this so many times where I've just recorded myself, like, practicing and
practice with somebody
and, like, dummy
as well.
run, or whether it's to yourself so you can watch it back and see what you can improve, or with a friend or family member or someone, so that helps take the pressure out of that situation. Like, it's all coming out for the first time and you jumble your words.
Exactly. Good to practice it, or as you say, like, do it to the mirror, record yourself, whatever it might be. If it's the first time you've had to have that discussion, like, definitely practice first.
And especially practice like different outcomes and how you'd react to that as well.
Exactly.
Molly, I think that wraps up our episode on getting a pay rise.
Yeah, we've covered a lot, from understanding the current landscape of pay rises, the company side of it. Hopefully we've been able to shine a bit of a light on what happens on the other side when you're asking for a pay rise. And also just some strategies for preparing that conversation and making sure that you go into it with as much chance of success as possible, and what to do if your request is denied.
If you have any questions or want to share your own pay rise story, please feel free to reach out to us on Instagram, workingonit.pod, or email us hello@workingonit.show.
Next time on the podcast, we're working on getting noticed at work, brackets, at work.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Until then, keep working on it.